All right. Hey, everyone. If you're following along with the series of videos I'm putting out for 460 for fall 2022, this is the third video in the series. The first one is the XR template setup, just getting a Unity project set up and working with XR so that you can do a build for your Quest. The second one was sort of a divergent video. It's talking about physics and like the different components, right, attached to an object, a sphere, I think is what I was showing in there, and showing the collider is the object or sorry, the component that will allow things to hit the object. So it actually has like a shell around it. And then the rigid body, right, which is the thing that Unity, the component that Unity uses in order to engage with the real-time physics engine, have gravity, drag, those sorts of things. In this one, I want to talk about the XR origin and then also the interactable components and kind of work through just sort of how that works, give you a sense of different things that you can manipulate as you're just playing with things in Unity and wanting to work with the XR kit and the Quest. Okay, so looking at our scene here, we're back in the scene from the first video where all I have is a floor and an XR origin, nothing else. I think there's a sphere in there, but we're starting from nothing here. So let's put an object in that we want to manipulate. I'm going to go ahead and create an object and create a sphere. It's way off in 3D space, so I'm going to recenter it to 0. So now it's back at the origin of the scene. I'm going to bring it up and just opening my game view just so I can see it. Whoops, so I can see it where it is to get a sense of where it is in the scene. Once you jump into VR, you're going to see this right away. This sphere is really big. This is because we're in VR, right? This is in relationship to you. It's a 1 meter sphere. So if you use the metric system, you know what that is. If you don't, it's about 3 feet, right? So it's pretty big. With that in mind, I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, just so that when we jump into VR, it's not so crazy. So let's just make this 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. That's more like a large ball, like a big basketball or something. And I want you to experiment with this. It's part of the assignment for you for the next couple of weeks, right? Is we're going to start learning about how this stuff works in VR. So experiment with making things bigger, smaller. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? How does that feel to interact with it, right? Okay, so right now, right, we've got a sphere in the scene. And if you remember back to the physics video, if we hit play, nothing will happen. It's just going to float there and that's it. However, we can add interaction to it with our XR interaction toolkit. And this is what we installed in the first video. And this was found in the registry all the way down here. And this is the thing that we brought in. And all this is, again, just a bunch of code that Unity has provided that allows for the actual buttons on your controllers, right, to do something in the engine, right? What do the button presses do? What do they mean? And then a bunch of different scripts that allow you to interact with objects and things in ways that you would expect maybe in a VR app. Okay, so let's make this interactable. If you want to do that, we want to add a component to it. We want to add something else to this sphere, which is in our hierarchy, which then would be in our game, so that we can grab it. So if we go in, you can see I already typed it there. But if you type XR, and then you're going to see all of the Unity XR, well, not all, but most of the Unity XR scripts that you're going to be able to add to objects. And if you look down, there's one called Grab Interactable. Let's go ahead and click that. And look what happened. Two things have happened to our object. One, it added this script. That's what this little hashtag, right? It's a C# script called XR Grab Interactable. And all of this stuff, these are different components. And if you're like a coding-minded person, you can see this script here, and it says XR Grab Interactable. And if you click on this little thing, you'll find it in your project over here. But if you double-click here, it's going to open it up in your IDE that you have. If you just installed Unity, it's going to default, I think, to Visual Studio. We could talk about changing that to whatever IDE you want if you use something else. But this is the actual script provided by Unity. If you're not a code person, code is not your thing, you do not have to access this or edit this in any way. But if you're curious about it and you are like your background is CS or your background is front-end web or whatever, right? This is something you can kind of work your way through. It's helpful to start looking through it maybe and ask questions about why and how these things work. And I can to the best of my ability, help translate some of this stuff for you too. But anyways, this is what Unity wrote and gave us. What you see as the designer is this, which is great, if you're not a code person, right? And this is, all this is doing is attaching itself to the sphere, and it's saying, now this thing is a grab interactable, something that can be grabbed by, this is very important, specifically these two things, your right hand, XR controller right hand, and your XR controller left hand, okay? And the thing that's like interacting with it is this thing. So the XR ray interactor is, if when you go into VR, you'll see this, it shoots out like a red ray. And when it hits something, if you remember back, use your big college brain, right? It's going out and hitting something. It is hitting a collider. So what it's doing is shooting out the ray, hitting this thing and saying, hey, is this interactable? And since it has this script on it, it's saying yes, it's returning that. And in the app, you'll see the default is your ray will turn from red to white. And we can talk about how to customize that and all kinds of stuff later. But it's going to change from red to white, which means this is in fact something that can be interacted with. And the default for interaction with the grab interactable is you squeeze the grip and it will shoot it to your hand. Okay. So to demonstrate that, I'll do that here. I'm going to jump into VR while on the Zoom, and you should hopefully be able to see it down here just fine. It might be kind of choppy because I'm recording this. I'm using Zoom just to record this really fast because it's super easy. It might be a little choppy because I'm obviously recording and streaming VR, but you can see sort of what I'm talking about. And also, hopefully you can hear me just fine. I'm just talking through my headphones. But this is also what we're going to do in class. You can see the tether here, and I have the Oculus app open here. My Quest is attached to my computer. We'll set this up in Julian 113 in a couple weeks once we have all the PCs in and everything. And you'll see that this makes it so much easier because you can do this in real time. Okay, so we're in the game. We're in Unity. I'm going to hit play. Loading, loading, loading. Peeking out what's doing, loading, script assemblies, blah, blah, blah. There we go. All right, so you can see, hopefully my hands, I'll double check my window here. This is where it gets a little tricky because I want you to be able to see this, but I also want you to be able to see my game view. So hopefully you can see this okay. Here's my rays, right? They're going out, they're hitting the ground, but they're not be able to do anything. And then we've hit the sphere collider and it's turned white. If I grip, comes to my hand. If I grip with my left hand, goes to my left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, ta-da, rigid body. And you notice I just kind of threw it and it's rolling. There's absolutely no friction and drag. So it's just going to roll forever because it's been set in motion. That's obviously totally unnatural. But your defaults in Unity are basically like a void, if that makes sense. There's like neutral nothing like physically happening. We'll talk about how to play with that as we move through the class. But that's it. That's the kind of base level. Okay. So what can we do to customize that, right? Well, the really simple things are what we talked about in the last video. You can play with the mass and drag here, and how much weight the object has. Another one that's really, really helpful is down here. You can play with the velocity scaling, the throwing angular velocity. This is your hand, right? How much like kind of how much power you're getting, it's getting from your hand, if that makes sense. And this is actually kind of confusing, or sort of confused me at first, that like this is how much it's receiving from your hand. Does that make sense? Like your hand has a certain amount of velocity, like this, but how much of that is actually being transferred to the object, right? And that's what you can control on the grab interactable. You can also change things here, right? On the actual hand, you can play with stuff like your actual hand. What is that doing? And the one thing I want to show you, there's lots of stuff in here. We'll talk about these controllers and things like that, and how like what buttons do what. The few things I want to show you in this video are these events, really quickly, and then also the attach transform, because I think these ones are the ones you're going to want to change immediately to make this have like a slightly more, well, more immersive, but also for this one especially a little bit more intuitive feel. So attach transform here. Okay, if you highlight over this, and this goes for a lot of stuff in Unity, especially the things like the XR interaction kit that they make, they tooltip it for you, which is great. So we're highlighting over the attached transform here on the XR Ray interactor. It says the transform that is used as the attach point for interactables will create an empty game object if none. So what this is doing is this is saying like, where do you want the object once you grab it to be, right? And what it defaults is to, it says none transform, which means it's putting it on this thing, which is invisible. It's kind of hard to see, right? But it's putting it like essentially on your fist. If you jump in, it's like on your controller, which is fine. Like it goes inside your hand. However, you may not want that, right? Because it feels like it's like covering up your controller. It always feels a little awkward to me. What we can do is actually provide a little spot for that. And we can create an offset. Maybe you want it like in front or somewhere else. And really quickly to show that, here's your right-hand controller, right? We're on that object here. I'm going to make a child. I know we talked about this in the Monday night class in our second meeting about parents and children really quickly. We'll go into more detail about hierarchical organization as the class unfolds. But I want to create a child. I want to put an object underneath this in the hierarchy and therefore attach it to the motion of the parent. So that means I want to make something underneath this that as I move my right controller, it also moves with it. And to do that, it's super intuitive. You right click and we could attach anything here. You could create an empty game object here, which would just be like the concept of an object, and we could use that as the attached transform. However, what I think is really helpful is to be able to visualize it so we can actually see the object. So I'm actually going to put a sphere here. And it's obviously huge at this point, right? I'm going to bring that down. We're going to make this smaller. So I'm going to scale that down. That was the R button. Scale it way down because we just want to be able to see what this is and where it is. And then really quickly, I'm going to rename this object because this isn't a sphere, right? This is actually going to be the attach transform. This is where the object, when we pick it up, is going to attach to. Does that make sense? Right now, it's in the same spot as the right hand. It is stuck to the right hand. And if I were to move, if I move this around, this one is moving with it. Does that make sense? Oops. What we want to do is actually probably, if you imagine in VR, you want to grab the object, have it be slightly in front of your hand, probably, if that makes sense. This is more like, again, maybe sim-based and not so much like grab a gun and like hold it or something. But I want to move this forward on the Z just a little bit, like that. Okay. And then we actually don't want this to be a sphere, right? We really actually just want to use this, right? We're using this as a place in 3D space that when we grab an object, it's going to stick it. So if you remember back in the previous video, I talked about these check marks, like turning these on and off. We can actually just turn these off. So if we need to find our attached transform, we can turn the mesh renderer on to be able to see where it is, but just turn it off when we're actually, playing the game, right? It's merely there for us to be able to see where we're placing something. The one thing you really absolutely want to do if you're following this kind of tutorial is you can't have the collider on. Because imagine what would happen, right? If you have the collider on and you try to grab an object, it's going to go to where there's physics and it will hit that thing. So instead of actually going your hand, it's going to hit this invisible like little sphere that you're holding and like fly away. So this should work. This will be slightly offset, right? It's a little bit in front. All we have to do is tell this script that was in here. Now, instead of, where's that? The attached transform, instead of saying use its own transform, use it, we want to use this. And I think this is the first time we've done this in this class, like just showing how you assign game objects, but it's really easy. Take on your right-hand controller here, take this thing and click. Don't let go. I'm just holding down left click. I'm going to drag it over to here. and assign the attached transform is now not this object, it is this object, which is 0.117 further in front on Z space. Okay, so that's a lot of like abstract stuff, but I think it'll make sense when you see it. So I'm gonna hit play, and then you can see, and then you'll also see how you can tweak this. Like you want to play with it and sort of move it around and try different things. All right, so I'm gonna hit play, and then you can see like sort of what that sort of thought process was. Okay. So now the ball is actually in front of my hand on my right hand, but if I hold it in my left hand, you see how it's like much closer, it's like in my hand, and now it's in front of my hand. In my hand, in front of my hand. And it's really, really subtle, and that looks kind of I don't know, blasé or like not particularly important when you're probably watching the 3D video. And hopefully you can see that the game viewer, you're seeing it in the scene view. I'm in VR, so I'm like trying to see if it'll work. But these are the sorts of things I want you to experiment with because you'll see it very quickly in VR. It's like, you know, 1/10 of a meter difference of like on your hand or not on your hand is profoundly different feeling as a just sort of experiential thing. Like where do you want the ball or how do you want to hold a hammer or whatever, right? So that's one thing that you can play with, and you absolutely should. The other one is down here, and these are we'll go into very great detail over time about the concept of events, audio events, haptic events, interactor events, and then you see all of this stuff down here, right? This is where in interactor events you would assign custom either scripts or custom concepts to have happen. For instance, you pick up the sphere and the sphere changes color, right? You pick up the sphere and the sphere disappears, which would be kind of weird, but you could maybe want to do that. Or when you highlight, you hover over something, it changes color. Or there's like a highlight around the outside, like you hover over it and it sort of glows yellow, right? To let you know that you can actually pick it up. This is where you would assign that stuff. I'm going to show you one of these just as a concept. This is stuff we haven't talked about yet in class, so I'm going to rush through a couple of things really quickly here, just to demonstrate how these things work. But know that this is kind of where we're heading. And know also, you guys, if you're in 460, you're grad students, right? All of this stuff, go if you want more info, obviously ask me. I will throw stuff at you to let you go further and dig. I put that onus on you as the student. I'm here trying to curate and push you in a direction and then push back. But also there are probably 500 tutorials on XR Interaction Toolkit out there. There's a Unity one that's official. I'll send that to you in an email just if you want to go through that process. But there are like tons of great things out there if you want to dive into one of these components, right? Do that. Like that, it's there for you, right? Just feel compelled to do that, right? And then, like I said in our first day of class, utilize me to help you find the holes or gaps in your knowledge from when you're going off, you know, finding something else, right? That's where I can really have value added to you, where just watching a YouTube video cannot, right? So anyways, that's a long spiel about like, yes, I haven't shown you how to do this yet, but like just go push a little bit. And if you want to do something, ask, though we will do this over time. Okay, stop and rant. On hover entered, I just want the sphere to change color, just to show you, okay? So to do that, to change colors for objects, we need to add something that's called a material to it. This will be coming up in class pretty soon. It's a file format if you've done any 3D modeling, Unity, anything like that. So I'm gonna call this hover. And I'm gonna do it here. I'm gonna change the color. It's like a kind of, looks kind of pea green. It's a little gross, like yellow. And then I'm gonna duplicate this. I'm gonna call this one not hover, but exit. And we're gonna change it to, I don't know, white. So when we hover on the object, it will change to yellow. And when we unhover, it'll go back to white. Okay, so logically, and maybe this can be on hover or no hover. Let's call it like that. That probably makes more sense, right? I mean, logically then our sphere, when it is not hovering, should be on no hover. And I'll do that by assigning this here. Again, we'll talk about this all in class about how to do that. And then in our controller, down here, right? What we want to do is do something to the sphere, right? When we hover over the sphere, we want the sphere to do something. We want it to change color. So what we do is we bring the sphere in. We say, okay, sphere, sphere. On hover enter, on hover exit, like there's a function, it's a method or a bunch of code that's being called when we hit that thing. And it says no function because nothing is happening. And then all this stuff is here, right? Again, we'll dive into these as we learn about more components. But for this one, we want to get the mesh renderer, which is the thing talked in the last video. It's blue. It's like showing what the thing looks like. And we want to grab the material. And on this one, we want to get the mesh renderer and we want to grab the material. And it just says none material. It's like, well, what happens when we enter the hover? Well, the material becomes hover. What happens when we exit the hover? Well, the material becomes no hover. It's not hovering, right? And now when you jump into VR, that's what it's going to do. It's going to turn it to yellow and then back to white, yellow, white, yellow, white, yellow, white. Really simple, but it's visually really helpful, right? To know when you are hitting something that is interactable in a way that's potentially obviously different than just having the ray, like the little white, red thing telling you. So again, real fast, just demonstrating concept. Boop, 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 like that. It's cool. That's it, right? That as a concept, like the sort of interactable, right here, that this stuff exists for you, is so helpful. Can't impress this enough. Like 5 years ago, when I started doing this, none of this existed in a sort of designer-facing thing. This may seem kind of complicated, and it is in the sense that you'll get your head wrapped around it over time, but it's obviously foreign at this point. But this was all like raw, man. You had to like code this or go and grab like code and mash stuff together to create these things 5 years ago. Now it's coalescing so that it's logical, if not a little cumbersome. So that's one thing. These are called interactor events. It could be anything, though. Think about like hover or this is select. This is when you actually use the object. You use a doorknob, it opens, it fires an animation. Or you put a key into something and turn it, it does something, right? It unlocks the door. This is where you do all of that. And the good news is most of those things that I just mentioned, key, unlock, put a key in a socket, all this stuff, it's all codeless. It's just using different components of the XR interaction toolkit, which is great. If you're a code functioning or code facing person, like that's your background, you can also extend all of that code, which is also awesome. You can do custom things. You can, have something outside of that. Maybe you want it to like, you want the door to open, but you want it to go from like slow to fast, and you want to do that without an animation. You can do that through it's called like lerping and like transform stuff, and that's all in code, and that's so cool, right? So that's all possible. Other things up here, just to show you really quick so you can experiment. Haptic events, if on select or on select exited, these just mean when you use the object, or on hover. If you were to click on this now, if you were to click on it and turn up the haptic intensity and haptic duration, maybe to 1, something like that, experiment and see what happens. This will, when you hover over it, your little controller is going to buzz. And that's just your haptic feedback, which again, can be really helpful. Don't think we set this in class yet, but we will when we start talking more about the sort of like layers of interactivity and best practices for VR design. Essentially, you need 3 things, or at least 2 of 3 things for your experience to work, which is you need audio feedback, visual feedback, or like tactile haptic feedback. So if you are pushing a button in VR, for instance, right, you need some sort of visual feedback that you push the button, or you need audio feedback that you push the button, or you need some sort of tactile feedback, like you feel the button or your controller buzzes, right? If you start overlapping those, it's really powerful. So audio and visual, you push the button, you don't feel it. Say you're using your hands, you push it, you don't feel the button, but it beeps and changes color. That does something to your brain. It tricks you really quickly that you think you pushed something. In fact, when it's like visually and audio wise, at a high enough quality, you could almost start to feel it in a way, because it tricks your mind into thinking you should feel the thing. So it's a little bit of a rant, but just why play with this? Because now, in this little world that I set up here, it changes color when I hovered over it, and it buzzes. So we've got two of them, right? We have some haptic feedback and the visual feedback. The third one would be we could play with audio. I'm not going to go into audio in this one because it's a whole other like component series. But if you want to, again, it's there for you, and just start to play on hover entered. It's going to ask you for a clip to play. Just let me know. Either you want to start pushing with audio ahead of when we're going to introduce it in class. Great, I will help you with that. Or maybe you know it already from doing a game design class or whatever, right? Great, but you're not obviously required to do this yet. Okay, those are like two big things to play with the hand controller, the XR Ray interactors, where it's just like pulling it to you. One more thing, just because I think I mentioned this earlier, you have this line renderer, right? This is the actual thing that's like shooting out the ray from you. And where is that? On, oh my gosh, I just forgot where these things are. XR Ray interactor. Oh, there it is. It's done. I tucked it away. On the XR interactor line visual. So you have this thing. This is the actual line. And then you have this line visual down here. You can change these colors, obviously. In fact, if we haven't been using materials and everything is like white, you actually probably don't want this to be white because it's really hard to see. It's super easy. Just pick another color. Oop, oh my gosh. Super easy. Just pick another color. And made this a gradient, so it's going to fade to white at the end. You could not do that, right? And change these colors to be whatever you want. For some reason, I have a rainbow saved in mine. You can play with these. We'll talk about through this component later in class. And then you can change like the curves and stuff. You're not going to hurt anything by clicking on stuff in here. And feel free to experiment and do a build and see what it looks like, especially in class when you're able to do this at runtime and just look in and play with stuff to see what feels good. I say all this because this is the kind of like laser pointer way of interacting and having things like teleport to you, right? Obviously, that's not the only way you can interact with objects. And there's another one, which Unity has called the direct interactor, which means you just reach out and pick it up with your hand. And you can't just like have it shoot over from across the world to you. I'll make another video in a second here today. I'll throw it up for you about direct interactors and how to set that up. So instead of using like the trigger kind of thing, which is probably better suited for a sim or something with a bunch of menus where you have to like open stuff with buttons and things, you can just go reach out and grab it. Like if you want to play a game and say you want to grab a basketball and throw it, right? That's probably the path you want to go. So that'll be in the next little video series here. I think that's it. Again, hopefully I didn't confuse you just throwing stuff in here, but that's sort of the flexibility and kind of power of this is that you have all of these different things here to allow you to just like dump interactivity and creative sort of thought processes. And to start thinking, once you start playing with this, remember back to the first day of class, in the presentation that I gave, where I talked about this technology, start thinking about the questions you ask once you start to see what is possible. And let these limitations, which are extreme, right here, right? These are, yes, lots of stuff is possible, but there are only certain things that you can figure out or know that are possible. Let those focus your creativity into something that is interesting. And let those interesting kind of dreams and questions you have be the questions you ask me. Okay, that's what you want to ask, because then I can help you sort of uncover and shape like what your experiences will be as you begin building this out as a first project. Okay, yeah, let me know if you have questions, and enjoy just kind of messing around and playing with the headset. Cool, see you later.